Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/audio. This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/audio.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you email me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Today I have our guest today is Gerald Cliff. He's co-author with the Baby Doll Serial Killer, the John Eric Armstrong Homicides, Murder in Motor Cities, Book 1. That's Gerald Cliff. Mr. Cliff, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Hey, thank you so much for coming on the show. Hey, can you tell the audience, who is Gerald Cliff?
Let's see. Long story. The only son of a career police officer from a little place called Battle Creek, Michigan. If you ate your cornflakes this morning, you'll recognize the cereal city. I became a police officer in the city of Detroit back in 1972 after finishing a college degree at Michigan State. Worked my way up through the ranks to the rank of commander. For anybody that doesn't understand, commander would be a rank above captain and right below deputy chief. I was, my assignment at the time of the case in question here, the John Eric Armstrong case, I had just been promoted to, we called it in the day, we called it the rank of inspector. It was a rank above lieutenant. And I was put in charge, my first command, of the Violent Crime Task Force. Violent Crime Task Force is a multi-agency group of detectives. We had FBI agents, we had an IRS agent, we had state police from Michigan, we had county police from Wayne County, where Detroit's located. The majority of detectives were from the city of Detroit, and we operated out of the Detroit Police Department. We were the lead agency, much to the dismay of the FBI. They seemed to think they were, but without us, there wouldn't have been an organization, and we kept reminding them of that quite often. Nonetheless, we were a hand-picked, I guess you would say, group of people in a highly unionized police department where assignments were based on seniority rather than merit, and I don't mean that to sound the wrong way, but it was a union exempt, I guess you would call it, for the purpose of picking people whose work history showed them to be above average. So all of my detectives were the cream of the crop from the city of Detroit. Plus, I had, like I said, a raft of support from state and federal officers, and it made us a unit without boundaries. And that was the reason that it was formed, because there are crimes in big cities that transcend its geographic borders, and in order to efficiently investigate and solve those crimes, you needed that kind of that ability to exceed the geography that was the city itself, or that is the city itself. So,
Let me ask you a question. I'll interrupt you for a second here, because you mentioned the IRS,
Sure.
right? So what kind of cases would you bring the IRS into? Like, for the most part, you got a problem with the IRS, they send you a letter. You got to have like a real serious beef with the IRS before they come in to prosecute you, right? So what kind of cases were you bringing them into, like drug, money laundering stuff?
There was one. I don't know what you know about the demographics of the city of Detroit, but just over our western border, the cities of Dearborn and Dearborn Heights, where the largest number of Arabic-speaking people in the world outside of the Middle East live. We had a big case that was ongoing for a number of years at the time that I was there. We're going back to 2000, involving the Chaldean Mafia. There were a number of white-collar-based crimes that were causing some significant grief financially, not necessarily violence-related, but they were still crimes nonetheless, and they were easier to be able for us to be able to investigate if we had an IRS agent with us that was able to access all of their information and still do it in a legal way. IRS does have an enforcement branch, and that's where our representative of that agency was the enforcement branch of the IRS.
And so then who would you take the case to? A local prosecutor or to a federal prosecutor?
No, we would. If it were a federal crime, we could take it to a federal prosecutor. If it were a state crime only, we would take it to a state prosecutor. Basically, the decision was usually made on the ease of access to that whatever level of the criminal justice system we were going to, and the likely penalties. Federal court sometimes criminally is more difficult to prosecute cases, more difficult to get search warrants, and so on. Whereas, and I think that was one of the advantages that the federal law enforcement agencies that participated with us saw, was that, typically a local police department can get on the phone and get a search warrant in a matter of an hour. I was involved in one multi-state case that was particularly challenging. I ended up with a team on the south side of Chicago asking, for a search warrant to raid a couple of addresses, and we sat in the waiting room of the U.S. Attorney's Office for something like 19 hours waiting for him to go over a 21-page request to give us a search warrant on a case that we had been pursuing all the way from Detroit. So,
yeah, the guy could have been on a plane 18 hours ago, right?
Yeah, I know. It's only a 5-hour drive from Detroit. I'm going, we should have called it in, and we could have stopped for lunch and,
took a shower, took a nap,
on
yeah.
the way,
Oh,
But
so it's okay. So you ran this violent crimes task force that incorporated federal cops, right? FBI and but did you get along with the FBI? It sounds like you had some kind of a rivalry with the FBI, but the rivalries are never at the street level in law enforcement. The rivalries are always at the very, very top, where the upper echelon of any law enforcement organization always thinks that they represent the premier agency in the fight against crime, and therefore they, in their minds, should be the lead agency. We should be working for the FBI. It's hard to explain to an outsider. We have the same relationship with our state police in Michigan. Local police officers tend to, kind of look down on them, and they tend to look down on us. Only at the top level. The officers on the street and the troopers on the street all work hand in hand. There's rarely, if ever, a cross-word exchange. It was that way at Violent Crime Task Force. I shared
the command office with the FBI agent in charge of their agents that were assigned to us. Right next to our office was the Office of the State Police Lieutenant, who oversaw their manpower contribution. But when it came time to fight crime and do an investigation, we were all in the same room. We were all sharing information the way it really should be, and it worked like a charm. We were the chief's go-to agency when something hit the department that was a little too difficult for just the homicide unit to deal with, or just a little too complex and far-reaching for the sex crimes unit to deal with. That's what put us in Chicago. We had a 5-state sex slavery ring that we were able to break, and in Detroit, and following it required the assistance of our federal partners. And the availability of that relationship and that unit made it possible to do it in an expeditious manner.
So that Chicago thing, the 5-state sex trafficking, were they taking young women from Michigan and importing them or exporting them over there? Is that what it was?
Yeah, the story is this. We stumbled onto this one. We went through a brief period, just a couple of years after the Armstrong case, where you went to any strip mall, any downtown location, and you could always find teenagers on the street selling junk jewelry. Yeah. They were well dressed, they were well fed, they were well cared for. They didn't look like homeless people because they weren't. What had happened was these kids were disenfranchised teenagers. They were having trouble in school, or they weren't getting along with their parents, and they'd run away from home or what have you, or they were on the brink of running away from home, and had encountered this group, and they were being enticed into this organization. They were given, they were taken out, they were given nice clothing, they were treated well, they were put up in hotel rooms in the area, as long as they went out and they worked with this group selling junk jewelry. And they were hawking it on the street as the real thing, but it wasn't. What they would do is they would work them like that for a while, and then all of a sudden one night they go to these hotel rooms where they had these kids, and they say, okay, listen, it's time, we got to get out of here, load up, and they put them in a van. They take that van and they drive to Chicago, or they drive to Milwaukee, or they drive to Toledo, or they drive to Gary, Indiana, and they get another hotel room. Well, I don't know what your experience is with big cities, but in big cities you have kids from low-income families that aren't all that well educated, and we always said, you take a kid from the Lower East Side, you move them to the Upper West Side, and it's going to be like you've taken them to another state and another city. They're completely lost. And what they did was they were taking these kids, moving them to Chicago, putting them up in a large house on the South Side, and they were basically enslaving them there, and they'd take their phones away from them. They wouldn't let them contact their families. They were in a strange city, completely lost and totally dependent upon the organizers. And then they would use them to put on, they called them rave parties or something like that, where they would, the girls in particular, they would be forced to dance, they would be forced to strip, they would be forced to prostitute themselves to the attendees that were obviously paying to attend these parties. And when they complained, when they tried to escape, this group had enforcers. And these enforcers, in a lot of cases, had earlier been victims that had been promoted from within, and they would physically penalize these kids for trying to get away. And they would bring them back into the fold, and they would, if necessary, they would lock them in rooms or tie them up if they had to. But nobody ever got away. We stumbled onto a girl in the process of doing this that happened to see a uniformed police officer ran to him, asked for help. Happened to be the officer happened to be inside of a building where he was able to actually lock the door and call for assistance, because there was always, where you found these kids selling jewelry, there was always a large number of them. There'd be 10 or 15 of them spread out, and with those kids, there would be these enforcers always on the watch for one of them wanting to make a break. And one of them made a break. We happened to have somebody in the right place at the right time, and they did the right thing, the smart thing, and they isolated themselves, called for backup, and when backup arrived, we had this participant of this, or I guess you would call him a victim of this group, tell us the story, and we were able to follow the case from there. And it took us, like I said, 5 different states.
What year was that?
That would have been very early 2000s. It was after the Armstrong case. I would say somewhere around 2001, 2002.
Okay, very interesting. I might want to send you an email after this.
Not a problem.
Somehow I was involved in. Yeah.
I have the case file on that one.
Were you? So you stayed with this violent crimes unit until your retirement?
No. I was only there for about a year after the Armstrong case. We had a couple of others, but nothing anywhere near the magnitude of the Armstrong case. The chief of detectives, I guess you would say, we used to call him the Deputy Chief Major Crimes Division, transferred me to command of a bigger unit, Special Investigations Division, which at the time consisted of sex crimes, child abuse, domestic violence, armed robbery, computer crimes. We call it property crimes. It would be financial crimes, the white-collar unit. The ICAC Task Force, Internet Crimes Against Children. And periodically during my tenure there, which was about 2 years, they would also, they moved the commercial auto theft section under my command in that Special Investigations Division. So at that point in time, it was a much larger department than it is now. We had almost 5,000 officers, and we're way down. They're way down. I retired in 2005, so their manpower is about half what it was then.
So how'd you get stumble across this John Eric Armstrong?
It
Mr.
was,
Baby Doll.
Yeah, we're sitting in Monday morning. Major Crimes was made up of homicide, special investigations, and violent crime task force. Every Monday we would brief in the commander's office, and we would update them on significant cases within our assigned area of expertise. So we're sitting in this office on a Monday morning, and there's myself, the officer in charge of special investigations, and the head of the homicide division. The homicide boss gets we're going back early again, 2000s. There were no smartphones. We had pagers and flip phones. His pager goes off. He excuses himself from the group, gets up, uses the boss's phone in the outer office for a few minutes. He comes back and he tells the commander, boss, we got a body over at Michigan and John Croc, which is far southwest side of the city, right near that Dearborn Heights border. And he says, I'm going to head out there when we're done. We go back to the meeting. A few more minutes go by, and the pager goes off again. He comes back. He makes his phone call. He comes back, and he tells us, he says, maybe we should discontinue this meeting, boss. He says there's now 3 bodies at this location, and they're looking, there may be more. So now it's an all hands on deck. The commander of the Major Crimes Division says, all right, everybody get up, get their coats on, we'll all meet out at the railroad track. So we all go out there. We find a dead female along the railroad tracks in plain view of anybody that might be passing by. Now, this is an area of a lot of trains and a lot of undergrowth, and it's kind of a wild area, I guess you would say, in terms of what it looks like. So, anyways, we get out there and we find the first body that was discovered had been obviously recently killed. Rigor mortis had already set in.
That's interesting, because when I was talking to Billy Ray about this, and she was telling me about the 3 bodies found at the railroad tracks, I just assumed he dumped them all there at the same time. But so he was dumping one and then going back a month later with a new victim?
Yeah, I don't think it was a month, but he had. We started with the first fresh body that we found, and then we started to expand, and the evidence techs were conducting an area search for any kind of clues that we might find. And alongside the railroad tracks, there was a culvert depression, and it was heavily filled with undergrowth. There was a lot of brush. They had in expanding their search area for evidence, they had stumbled across a second body. And it had obviously been there a lot longer than the first one that they found. And not too long after that, and only a few yards away from it, they stumbled onto a third body that was seriously decomposed. I mean, it had apparently been there for several weeks to maybe even a couple of months. And they all were in a similar state of undress, and it was obvious on first sight that they'd all been sexually molested, that they'd all been strangled. And that's when the balloon went up, and we got that second phone call, and we all ended up going out to the scene together. And like I said, it was an all hands on deck situation where the presence of 3 is what it requires, according to the definition, to be a serial killer or a serial homicide situation. And 3 females, all undressed to the same extent, all obviously sexually assaulted and in various states of decomposition. That was a big deal. It was a huge deal. What he was doing, he would capture a victim or entice a victim into his car, take him to this fairly secluded location, assault them. In the process of assaulting them, he would kill them, and he would come back to visit them. He was a necrophiliac. He would come back to visit them and have relations with them until he could no longer stand the smell.
Wow.
He would then just basically dispose of the body simply by rolling it down the culvert into the underbrush and go get another one. And that was his method of operation. So, and it was obvious from the states of decomposition of these women that he'd been at that location for, like I said, probably up to 2 months. So it was it was a striking scene.
But prior to that, you didn't notice like indications of word on the street where these hookers, street walkers were working, that people were disappearing and stuff like that?
Not really. Usually the sex trafficking and the what do they call that now? The street sex industry doesn't usually confide in the police department unless they have to.
Yeah.
They know each other. They know what goes on. There had been, we found out afterwards in the investigation that there had been talk among them. They all knew that there was a predator out there, but one statistic I saw is that a streetwalker has a 200% higher probability of being assaulted and murdered than the average female just going about her business. So I hate to say it, but it kind of appeared to us from talking to these girls after the fact that it was just an accepted part of their job. I guess you would say that they were more likely to be assaulted and potentially killed. Yeah. I mean, it's in a big city, to report somebody missing, a missing persons bureau job is kind of, humdrum. It's basically all you're doing is gathering statistics more than, conducting high-level investigations. Certainly we look for missing persons, but it's not that frequently that you actually find one unless it's something like this. So,
but in this case, he was only successful in murdering half of the victims he came across, right? Like there were 5 survivors out of 10, right?
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much. But that was only in the metropolitan Detroit area. Okay, the numbers you're talking about. There were 5 killed that we actually got him on. He confessed to somewhere in the area of 19 to 21 total victims, but he had only moved to the Detroit area shortly before we encountered these bodies. He was born in North Carolina, I think it was, and he had been in the Navy for several years. When he was discharged from the Navy at the end of his service in Norfolk, Virginia, he admitted to having killed a woman there. And what made the case so interesting and so high level, I guess you would say, is that he also confessed to having killed women while he was assigned to the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier pretty much all over the world, any place that they put into port. And the sailors got shore leave, or when he got shore leave anyway, he would go into whatever city they were at. He would find himself a prostitute, and he would engage in his activity, sometimes quite frequently to the point of death of his victims. And the Nimitz was it was based in the Pacific. Their home base was, I think, in Washington State, Washington or Oregon at that time, and they patrolled the Pacific, going to countries mainly in like Taiwan, Vietnam, that general part of the world. So wherever they put in, and he got shore leave, that's where he would go, and he would, do his thing.
Yeah, I wonder if he was practicing the necrophilia there too. Like for the first night out, he would kill someone, stash him, and then go back, for a free return trip.
Yeah, well, from his stories, I don't think he had the opportunity. Okay. I don't know anything about I've never been in the military. I don't know what his shore leave may have been like. He did talk a couple of times about what he would do is he would go in, he would find himself a prostitute. They would get a room, or she had a room already. He would go up, do his thing. One time he said he just left. He realized he killed her, his victim. He said, I just left, went back to the ship. One time he says, yeah, I realized I killed her. I didn't want to get caught. So I went and I opened a window, and they were on an upper floor in an old hotel, and he says I rolled her off the window, and she landed in the trash down below. A lot of these countries were somewhat problematic for investigative purposes. We got the very distinct impression that a lot of the places that he'd been in foreign countries, they kind of looked upon killing prostitutes as a public service. Okay. And they really didn't put a whole lot of effort into the investigation.
So you left us off, you're discovering these bodies by these railroad tracks, but how did you come into contact with John Eric Armstrong? How did he become a suspect?
Well, when we were at the scene, our boss realized right away, okay, this is a serial killer. We need to pursue aggressively this investigation. He's obviously killing a number of women. This guy's my boss's words. This guy's a killing machine. He's not going to stop until we stop him. We've got to find him, and we've got to do something quick. His first inclination, like I said, Violent Crime Task Force had FBI agents in it. Call the psychological profiling unit and get them out here to look at the scene, to work with us, to help us expedite this investigation. So that's what they did. From the scene, the commander called the FBI Academy at Quantico, talked to someone from the profiling unit there, and expressed his concern. He even offered to hold the scene until they could get there from Washington or from Quantico, Virginia. He was told, "Look, that's really nice of you, but it's not really practical." He says, "I don't care how practical it may or may not be." He says, "We want to make sure that we get this guy, and if you having access to the scene untouched, so to speak," he says, "we'll do that. We will make that possible for you." They declined, and they basically advised us what we needed to know over the phone and through their agents that were assigned to us. We were, they were communicating and guiding us long distance, I guess you would say. And one of the things that they told us that actually led to the expedient discovery of the killer was, don't concentrate on his successes. Concentrate on his failures. For every one that he's killed, there's probably one that didn't get killed in the process of being assaulted by this guy. Find a living victim. So that's what we did. We spread out, and we had, like I said, every investigatory unit in the entire city dedicated to this, and that's hundreds of detectives working the street, talking to the street workers and whatnot. And it didn't take us long. They were right. We found a couple of women that said, "Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about. A friend of mine was last seen with him the other, a couple of weeks ago. I haven't seen her since." One said, "Oh yeah, he dragged me into or he got me into his car, drove me to that area, and next thing I know, he's trying to strangle me." But it turned out that wasn't a woman. It was a male dressed as a woman, and John Eric, as big as he was, had bitten off a little more than he expected, and the intended victim made good their getaway. They, through developing leads like that, we got a physical description, we got a description of tattoos, we got a description of his vehicle, we got an idea what part of the neighborhood we were likely to find him in, which was Michigan Avenue. It's a main street emanating out of downtown, going all the way up to the western suburbs, and that part of Michigan Avenue was known for its prostitution. So once we had the physical description, the vehicle description, so on and so forth, it was a simple matter then of having our detectives on the street doing surveillance, watching for the guy. We also put out the information to the precinct, citywide, with a focus on the precinct that this was all occurring in, which was at the time the 4th precinct. And as it happened, our surveillance car spotted him, and about the same time the marked precinct unit spotted him, the uniformed officers in the marked car decided to make a traffic stop, because once they got close, they realized that he fit the driver fit the physical description of the perpetrator we were looking for. The car matched the description of the vehicle we're looking for, so they decided to make a traffic stop. Our surveillance cars were watching all the whole time. Even the officers didn't know this. And the decision was made, let the marked car stop him. If he decides to run, at least that way, we can shadow the chase, and any high-speed attempted evasion of arrest would be safer with a marked car chasing him. He didn't run. He pulled over. The officers walked up. They took one good look at him, and they asked him out of the vehicle. And as they're talking to him, one of the streetwalkers walked up and goes, "That's the guy that tried to rape me the other night." Well, now they're, at this point, of course, our surveillance cars are closing in, and these officers are going, "Where did all these detectives come from?" And the guy's in custody, and the first thing that he said when they handcuffed him, he kind of just shook his head and said, "I'm glad it's over." So from the time we found the bodies until the time we had him in handcuffs, it was only about 41 hours.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep.
So then what happens? Were you in on the interrogation?
I watched the interrogation. At my level in the organization, it wouldn't have been appropriate for me to be talking to him. We needed, detectives to talk to him. They spent several hours with him just getting to know the guy, talking to him about his life in the Navy, talking to him about his upbringing, where he lived in North Carolina, South Carolina. I keep getting those confused. Anyway, where he lived down south, what his life had been like, if he had cousins, if he had brothers and sisters, if he was married, if he had children, which he did. He was married and he had children. Hard to believe. But,
well, I was going to ask you, because I was asking Billy Ray about the wife. Now, did you get a chance to interview the wife?
I didn't, but our detectives did, and she was quite a challenge from what they told me. She was hostile almost to the point of having to be restrained. Of course, if somebody walked up and told you that your better half was a serial killer and wanted for multiple homicides, I'm not sure that, you take it very smoothly. There's going to be denial. There's going to be, resistance and whatnot.
See, because my thinking is that they met in the Navy, and he claims he was doing this in the Navy. They met in the Navy. He seemed to have a fetish of choking, So did she say, "Oh yeah, he likes to do that"? Were they doing that between themselves, the choking part at least?
I don't know if they really got into that deeply into the details, because it was a very, very hostile interaction with her. One of the officers that was at her house actually joked. He says, "I thought we were going to have to call her backup."
Yeah.
Yeah, she did not take it well.
Well, do you think that was just because she was in such shock, or perhaps she was aware of what was going on? She's an accomplice.
Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know what would go through a person's mind at a point like that when you're informed that your closest relative is a serial killer, rapist,
Now these interrogations, like nowadays, right? You can watch interrogations on YouTube all day long. They got there's thousands of them up there, right? Are these available on videotape? Were they videotaped?
I don't believe they were. Oh. Michigan enacted a law a few years after that where we had to videotape all interaction with suspects, even on the street, and hence body cameras came into use. In-car video came into use all after this incident took place. I don't believe that there were any videos of the interaction, but one of our main focuses once we had him in custody, we met with the detectives that we had selected to interrogate him, and one of them was our youngest member. He was like 23 years old, and he was, in his own words, he was shocked to the point of almost being in a panic that we had trusted him with something that significant. But we put him with an old veteran so that he could learn firsthand. It was a priceless education, in my opinion, and we knew this guy had talent. He did very, very well in his career. He rose quite quickly through the department ranks as well. But we told them, be careful no mistakes. We do not want somebody like this getting off on a technicality. If he wants to go to the bathroom, take him to the bathroom. If he needs you to hold his hand while he does it, hold his hand. If he's hungry, buy him food. If he's tired, let him sleep. If he's thirsty, get him a drink. But do not do anything that could be criticized or that could be pointed to as a reason to dismiss the information that you're getting as fruit of the poisonous tree, so to speak. So they did a painstaking interrogation or interview with this guy, and it was several hours into the process of talking to him before they even broached the subject of the bodies at the railroad tracks. They had talked to him about his life in the Navy. They had talked to him about the significance of his tattoos. They had talked to him about his childhood and upbringing. They talked to him about his father and his mother before they even asked him about the victims. And once they got to the point of actually broaching the topic of the homicides, the senior detective, and by this time they were very familiar. He was very comfortable with them. You could tell by the tone in his voice that the officer reaches over and he touches the back of his hand for a second, kind of like to reassure him. And when he pulled his hand back from Armstrong's other hand that he touched, he says, "John, do you know what I just did?" And he says, "Well, yeah." He says, "You touched my hand." He says, "Yeah." He says, "And in doing that, I left a part of me on you, and a part of you was left on me." He says, "Do you know what DNA is?" And Armstrong, you could kind of see the awakening in his face when he realized what he had done and what they were talking about. He said, "Anything you touch, you leave your DNA on." And he said those women that are out there have been sexually molested multiple times after their death. He says if there's any part of you on any part of them, we're going to be able to prove it. And he was talking about DNA. So at that point, Armstrong just said, something to the extent of, "Well, I might as well tell you everything." And that's when he started confessing to murder after murder after murder. There were so many that he wasn't exactly clear on some of the places that he committed these crimes because he had done them all over the world. And all he would say is, all he could say, and he was very helpful, but all he could tell us was what he remembered. There may have been more than the ones that he told us about, but, there was absolutely no resistance whatsoever. He just talked for hours. Every time he would start on a new witness, or on a new victim, our detectives were told, re-advise him of his rights and make sure that he fills out the form and he signs it for each and every one of the conversations you have pertaining to a particular victim. So if there's 19 victims, there had better be 19 signed advice of rights forms that he voluntarily reviewed with you and that he signed in your presence, and that's what they did, so that the defense attorneys really didn't have a leg to stand on.
Well, Mr. Cliff, let me ask you this, because ultimately he did plead not guilty. Did they allow his confessions in, or were they suppressed?
The not guilty plea was a result of his discussions with the defense attorney, if I'm remembering exactly right. But this was such a high-profile case, he didn't get the standard court-appointed attorney. I mean, this was seen as a prize case. So we had the best attorneys in our legal defense field almost competing to represent this guy, because this is only the second serial killer in my entire 31-year career in Detroit. And the last one prior to him was 10 years before that. So whoever was representing this guy was going to be in the newspapers for several weeks to come. And there were a lot of very, very high-priced defense attorneys that were eager to take this case for free just to get the publicity. So he ended up with a very, very top-notch defense attorney, and the investigation into his confessions was such that, like I mentioned before, a lot of these foreign countries, they didn't want to. It didn't really rise to the level of importance for them that it would have here. And we didn't get a whole lot of cooperation. It was almost like, okay, yeah, so he was murdering prostitutes. Okay, so what do you want me to do about it, you know? So the ones that he confessed to in foreign countries, he went back on his confession and said, "No, I don't. In retrospect, I didn't kill those women. I must have been mistaken when we were." And we never brought that up in trial.
Okay.
He was allowed to renege on those confessions, basically because it would have been next to impossible to prosecute. But
only the foreign confessions, they allowed the local confessions in?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, yeah. And he was convicted on all 5 of those.
I wonder why he went to trial then. If he knows they're going to be able to use the confessions, why wouldn't you negotiate?
Well, he confessed,
yeah.
and he did it before he asked for an attorney.
No,
he
I
made
understand
sure that he was aware that he had the right to an attorney. He just chose not to exercise that right. When the attorneys got involved, it was after the warrant had been issued and he had been charged. Then they came along. Then they made the moves to eliminate the confessions to the ones in foreign countries. Even I don't remember exactly whether or not the Norfolk case was even brought up. He had confessed to it. We had reached out to the Norfolk authorities. They had sent us the case file, and we were able to determine pretty much conclusively that he was the perpetrator, because in committing that murder, after he had choked the woman and dumped her out of the vehicle, because a lot of times he would commit his crime inside of his vehicle. He was driving the Jeep that we arrested him in, and he had backed over her. Wow. And there was tire mark evidence that would have linked him, physical evidence like that would have linked him, plus DNA would have been present. So there was no problem convicting him in Norfolk. It's just that they looked at it and said, well, you guys got him on 5. Why should we get involved? We'll just close our case on the fact that you made the arrest. Private conversation behind closed doors. Virginia had the death penalty at that point. We were kind of hoping that they'd take him off our hands. They were probably doing the calculations in their own minds. I know I would if I were a detective in that jurisdiction. I would have said, geez, if we take him, we got to put him up for 20 years while he exhausts all of his appeals before we can, put him to death. And somebody's taxpayers are going to be paying for this guy to stay alive for the next decades, regardless of where it is. And Michigan's got him for 5, and they're holding him. Let them have it, So,
well, let me ask you this.
I never heard that from anybody, but,
Mr. Cliff, let me ask you a question. Now,
sure.
When he was being interrogated, did he reveal a motive for doing it? Was he motivated by sexual urges, or just what was his reason?
Well, he had this thing about his father. His father and he did not have a really good father-son relationship. He had said a number of times that when he was in the process of having sex with these women, that even the ones that didn't die told us that he would, like, in the process of having sex, he would reach for their throat. He would start saying, "I hate prostitutes. I can't stand prostitutes." And he said that he would see his father's face. Mm-hmm. and kind of black out. And then when all of a sudden he realized what had happened and his partner was dead, he would kind of like come to his senses and realize that he'd committed a murder, and then either hide the body, leave the body, and exit the scene, depending on where he was at the time and what his options were.
Did he admit to returning and revisiting the body for the necrophilia?
Here, yeah, for the ones here, yes, he did.
He admitted to it.
Because I personally, I was, like I said, at my level in the organization, I would never have been the one to talk to a person accused of homicide or rape or anything like that. But I was so fascinated by this guy that during a break, after he had admitted to all this, I kind of poked my head in the door, and I asked the detectives, I said, can I ask him a question? They go, yeah, sure. I looked at him, I go, John, what would prompt you, if you're revisiting these victims and having sex with their corpse, what would prompt you to dispose of that one and go get another one? And he said, basically, this kind of sent a shiver up my spine. He says, obviously they're decomposing, and he said, obviously, after you're done, you take on the odor of the dead body. He said, when I didn't think I could get past my wife anymore without it being noticed, he said, I knew it was time for a new one.
Oh, that's disgusting. That's disgusting, man. Oh, my God. Gerald Cliff, we're out of time, my friend. On that note, why should you leave on that note, man? Oh, my God. Let's start over. We've been talking to Gerald Cliff. It was going so well. The book is called The Baby Doll Serial Killer. The John Eric Armstrong Homicides, Murder in the Motor Cities. It's by B.R. Bates, Billy Ray Bates, and Gerald Cliff. Mr. Cliff, thank you so much. Incredible story. Anything you want to leave us with? We got about a minute left.
The only thing I can say, like I said, you wanted other cases. I saved files from other cases when I retired. I had them with me. I haven't written anything on them yet, but I still got them. So
I tell you, if I were you guys, I would hunt down if there was any video of these or even audio of these confessions and put them up on YouTube. It would be great for book sales. The Baby Doll Serial Killer, the John Eric Armstrong Homicides, Murder in the Motor City, Series Book 1. Gerald Cliff, thank you so much, sir.
Not a problem. It's been a pleasure, sir.
Good night.
Bye.